The worst nightmare that you've ever had. The ocean is full of spellbinding creatures whose appearances, feeding habits, and behaviors make me relish the fact that I don't actually have to go in there. Among these creatures, there is one that is the absolute poster child for nightmare-inducing science fiction stories. It's called the Bobbit Worm, and it basically looks like the tail of a facehugger. Bobbit worms are a type of bristleworm that live in tropical oceans. And if you've never heard of a bristleworm before, that is between you and Google, because their bodies are divided into many segments, and each of those segments has a pair of bristles attached to it that basically look like a bunch of spikes running up and down the sides of the bobbit worm's body. Side note, bobbit worms are beautifully iridescent creatures. See? I said something nice. Anyway, they typically grow between 2 and 4 feet long, but in 2009, scientists in Japan's Seto fishing harbor found a bobbit worm that was 9 feet 10 inches long. So, what do you think the bobbit worm is doing at the bottom of the ocean? Great question. Killing things. I mean, sure, they're omnivores, which means that they'll eat seaweed and algae when nothing else is available, but they're actually really successful predators. And I'm not just talking about the stalking you through the ocean type of predators either. Bobbit worms are actually ambush predators, meaning that the majority of their hunting style deals with hiding and waiting. But how does a 9-foot-long worm covered in spikes hide and wait in the ocean? Turns out that when a bobbit worm reaches full maturity, it makes a mucus-lined burrow in the ocean floor. And when it's in full stealth hunting mode, it slinks all the way down into that burrow until just its head is visible. And now's a good time to pull over and take a closer look at the bobbit worm's head because I can't sleep. So bobbit worms have 5 antennae sticking up around their heads, and when they bury themselves to get in full stealth mode, these antennae stay exposed so that they can sense when prey is close. When something swims by and triggers their senses, they shoot up from their burrows and grab the prey with their razor-sharp jaws. These jaws are so strong that they've been known to cut prey in half. For me, the most disturbing part about the bobbit worm's jaws is that they seem to retract back into the worm's body and almost fully disappear. But unfortunately, if you're caught by a bobbit worm, the retracting jaws are the least of your worries because once the worm grabs some prey, it instantly drags it back down and disappears into the ground. Can you imagine being a fish just swimming around minding your fish business? Out of nowhere, a worm pops out of the ground, reaches up and grabs you and drags you into the ocean floor. When I tell you, this thing is an alien. Not a lot is known about what happens once the worm grabs food and disappears into the ground. All we know is that it eventually reemerges and continues hunting. I want to take this time to remind you that naming is an evolving process in the scientific world. The name Bobbit Worm has been liberally applied to worms that have been found in different parts of the world. It's not clear if these worms are actually different species, but for our intents and purposes, when I say Bobbit Worm, I'm referring to the giant fish-snatching, razor-mouthed, iridescent-bodied worm that lives at the bottom of the ocean and looks like this. With its razor-sharp jaws and super effective hunting tactics, the bobbit worm can eat pretty much whatever it wants. From the predatory octopus to the poisonous pufferfish, the world is just one giant drive-through window for the bobbit worm. Turns out, some of its potential prey has found a way to fight back. Okay, so there's this fish called Scalopsis affinis. Before it reaches full maturity, it feeds in large groups in a very specific area at the bottom of the ocean. which seems like a prime target for a bobbit worm. When Scalopsis affinis sees a bobbit worm hiding, or it sees the bobbit worm snatch another fish, it goes over to that spot and starts to shoot a jet of water at the worm. When other fish see that it's doing this, they join in and they all mob the bobbit worm, shooting various amounts of water at it. This results in the worm retracting and retreating back into its burrow. Prey fighting back by mobbing predators is something that we see all over the animal kingdom. In this case, it's particularly interesting because when Scalopsis affinis does it, other fish from different species have been seen joining in. This is probably a coping mechanism that developed over millions of years because, surprise, surprise, giant razor-jawed burrowing worms that live at the bottom of the ocean are nothing new. In fact, scientists found 400 million-year-old jaw fossils that fit the description of a gigantic bobbit worm. I hate to be the one to tell you this, but bobbit worms don't only stay in the ocean. They've actually been known to sneak into aquariums and hide undetected for long periods of time. In 2009, staff at an aquarium in Cornwall were investigating why their coral kept getting damaged and why fish were inexplicably disappearing. What they found after dismantling the entire aquarium was a 4-foot-long bobbit worm named Barry, which was eventually relocated into its own tank. You're probably thinking, okay, bobbit worms attack other fish and animals, but do they bite human beings? Yes, bristleworms in general will bite when handled, and their bristles can penetrate skin, causing, among many other things, long-term numbness. So keep your hands to yourself. That's all for now, and if you run into a bobbit worm, make sure you bring a mob.